Today, we drift into Rhode Island, 1975, a town of porches and bicycles, where doors stayed unlocked and danger was always imagined to come from somewhere else. But beneath the calm hum of sprinklers and screen doors lay a silence no one wanted to hear. A 5-year-old boy ran out to play a game of cowboys on a bright Sunday afternoon and never came home. His name was Jason Foreman. His parents searched the woods, the fields, the water. Neighbors carried flashlights through the dark, calling his name into the wind. For 8 years, that name echoed without answer. And then, when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't found in a forest or a river or a stranger's car. It was found only 3 houses away, hidden in the bedroom of a boy no one suspected. A boy whose diaries whispered about possession, about preservation, about keeping what he could not bear to lose. The police called it a crime. The neighbors called it unthinkable. But long after the closet was opened, the town could only ask, how many secrets can hide in plain sight, waiting for someone brave or unlucky enough to open the door? The page is yellowed brittle, written in a cramped teenage scrawl that feels far too neat for the words it carries. It doesn't scream, it whispers, and that's worse. One line, just one line, burns into the eyes of anyone unlucky enough to read it. I put him in the closet so he could stay with me. He is safe there. No one else can have him. No timestamp, no explanation, just a thought preserved in ink like a fossil of obsession. The kind of note that doesn't announce itself with red sirens, but instead seeps, slow and oily, under the skin. Imagine stumbling across this in your child's room, among math homework and comic books. What do you do with it? Tear it up, laugh nervously, chalk it up to creativity? Or do you feel the pull of something darker, a compulsion to open that door, that closet, and see whether the words are literal? For the family of 5-year-old Jason Foreman, who vanished one spring day in 1975 from his quiet neighborhood in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, that closet wasn't just metaphor. It became prophecy. Behind its door lay years of silence, denial, and one of the most grotesque hidden truths ever to fester in an American suburb. The boy who wrote those words, Michael Woodmansee, wasn't some faceless monster pulled from a horror movie. He was a local teenager, barely old enough to shave, living just 3 houses down from Jason's home. On paper, he blended in, shy, awkward, overlooked. But inside his notebook, in his secret world, he was building a private shrine of control, fixation, and something so unspeakable that, even decades later, court officials argued over whether the public could handle knowing it. This is not a ghost story. This is a real kind of haunting. The kind that sits at the dinner table across from you, smiling politely, while in his closet something unspeakable waits in the dark. And when the closet was finally opened, it wasn't just bones that spilled out. It was every parent's worst fear, every neighbor's broken trust, and every community's nightmare realization that sometimes the danger isn't at the edge of town. It's in the boy next door, writing in his diary, planning in silence. The skeleton in the closet wasn't just metaphor. It was Michael Woodmansee's truth. 1975 wasn't the kind of year people expected to birth nightmares. This was suburban Rhode Island, neat lawns, cul-de-sacs where kids rode banana seat bikes, and fathers still home in time for dinner. The war was over, Nixon was gone, and in places like South Kingstown, life was supposed to be bland, safe, predictable. But safety is an illusion, and in hindsight, you can almost hear it cracking. South Kingstown was the kind of town where parents let children roam, unchaperoned, as if the streets themselves were babysitters. The air smelled of salt from nearby beaches, radios hummed Fleetwood Mac or Elton John, and televisions flickered with the background static of Watergate hangover and bicentennial optimism. On those sidewalks, innocence was a currency, freely spent, rarely guarded. Jason Foreman was 5 years old that spring, a boy with boundless energy and a face that neighbors swore could light up a street corner. On May 18th, he was playing a simple game of cowboys and Indians with friends just down the block. Nothing sinister, nothing remarkable, just a background noise of every American neighborhood in that decade. Parents heard the echoes of laughter and shouts. They didn't hear the clock ticking down to disaster. And there, barely a few houses away, sat 17-year-old Michael Woodmansee in his bedroom, his own world stitched together with alienation. He was the kind of teenager who didn't fit the mold. Not athletic, not social, not even rebellious in a glamorous way. Instead, he was absent, present but withdrawn. You know the type. The kid who walks the halls like a ghost, teachers forgetting his name, classmates forgetting he exists until it's too late. South Kingstown, like every small town, had its blind spots. The police station was modest, crime nearly non-existent, and community spirit ran so high it became its own kind of blindness. After all, who looks over their shoulder in a town where everyone waves hello? That's what makes the silence afterwards so cruel. When Jason vanished, the streets that once rang with playful shouts filled with something else. The stomp of search parties, the drone of helicopters, the strained voices of parents calling a name into the dark. What had been a community built on trust began to mutate into suspicion. Doors that were once left unlocked clicked shut. Conversations in driveways grew short, guarded. But no one, not one single neighbor, turned to quiet Woodmansee house and wondered if the missing boy was only a few steps away. That's the horror of it. The monster wasn't hiding in the woods or lurking behind dumpsters. He was in plain sight, sipping sodas, writing in notebooks, and waiting for someone to finally notice what he had done. Michael Woodmansee wasn't born with a neon sign blinking danger. He was born in 1957, the son of an ordinary family, the kind of boy who should have grown into another faceless man, commuting to Providence and mowing his lawn on Sundays. Instead, he became the town's hidden shadow. By 17, his presence was a contradiction, painfully forgettable and yet deeply unsettling if you looked too closely. Teachers described him as quiet, polite, but vacant, like his words came from a teleprompter only he could see. Classmates barely remembered him at all. Some thought he was just shy. Others whispered he was off, though no one could put their finger on how. He wasn't the weird kid who made scenes. He was the weird kid who didn't exist until you suddenly noticed he was staring too long, too still. Psychologists would later call him isolated, introverted, possibly nursing violent fantasies. But in 1975, none of that language was in the suburban toolkit. Back then, you either fit in or you were odd. And odd was tolerated, ignored, forgotten. He filled notebooks with strange ramblings, his handwriting disturbingly tidy, almost ornamental. These weren't just private musings. They were chronicles, narratives, diaries of obsession that blurred the line between reality and fantasy until no one, not even Woodmansee himself, could untangle them. Within those pages, he invented a world where power, control, and possession replaced the humiliations of his everyday life. And then there was the house. The Woodmansee home was ordinary from the outside, a modest structure, same as any other on the block. But Michael's bedroom became something else entirely, a cocoon of seclusion. Posters on the walls were minimal, the space eerily sterile. It was less a teenager's refuge and more a laboratory of thought, a space where his hidden fascinations fermented unchecked. Neighbors later said he seemed harmless, invisible, even. He wasn't the type to throw parties, smash mailboxes, or pick fights. But invisibility is its own mask. In that void, he built fantasies no one could see, fantasies that would eventually swallow a child whole. And here's the paradox that gnaws at you. Woodmansee didn't look like the bogeyman. He didn't leer or snarl. He didn't carry knives down the street or wear menace on his sleeve. He looked like background furniture. And that's what made him lethal. Because the scariest figure in any town isn't a loud troublemaker. It's the quiet one no one bothers to notice until damage is already done. May 18th, 1975. It was a Sunday. Unremarkable, sunlit, ordinary in the way tragedy always is before it detonates. Little Jason Foreman ran outside to play with friends. He wore a red shirt, blue jeans, sneakers worn thin from endless running. The kind of outfit so normal it should have guaranteed safety. Children played in the streets the way they always had. Unsupervised, wild, joyous. At some point in the afternoon, Jason peeled away from the group. Maybe it was boredom, maybe a fleeting distraction, maybe the gravitational pull of curiosity. Witnesses say he was last seen near his own home, barely a stone's throw from safety. And then he wasn't. His mother called his name for dinner. Silence. She checked the backyard, the front porch, the neighbor's yard. Silence. Then panic. The family's voices grew louder, sharper, desperate. Other parents joined in, their voices layering like a chorus of dread. Still silence. The game of cowboys and Indians had ended, but one child hadn't come home. The search that followed was the stuff of small-town myth. Dozens of people fanned out, scouring streets, fields, backyards. Police mobilized helicopters. Neighbors dragged ponds. They combed through the woods with flashlights slicing through the dark. Some swore they heard faint cries. Others were convinced the boy had wandered off and would stumble home by dawn. But dawn came, and the space at the Foreman family's breakfast table remained empty. Theories bloomed instantly, some wild, some chillingly plausible. Maybe he'd been lured into a car. Maybe he'd fallen into the water. Maybe someone, some stranger, some drifter, had snatched him. After all, that's where fear always points. To the outsider, the unfamiliar, the figure from somewhere else. What no one imagined, not yet, was that Jason's vanishing act had ended just a few houses away, within walls they all passed every single day. Inside the Woodmansee home, the truth was already sealed behind a door, waiting silent as the town tore itself apart searching. For the Foremans, the first night without Jason was an eternity. For the Woodmansees, it was disturbingly quiet. Michael remained in his room, alone, invisible, while the world outside drowned in chaos. And there it is, the fracture, the first disturbance. A missing boy, a neighborhood unraveling, a predator unnoticed, quietly keeping a secret in the most ordinary place of all, his own closet. The disappearance of Jason Foreman didn't fade into the background hum of unsolved cases. It lodged like glass in the throat of South Kingstown. For days, then weeks, search parties grew more frantic, more desperate, until the energy of hope twisted into exhaustion. Parents clutched their children tighter. Kids weren't allowed to roam free anymore. The once carefree neighborhood had become a stage set for paranoia. Every lead dissolved into smoke. A shadowy figure spotted near the beach. A report of a boy matching Jason's description in a nearby town. A car that lingered too long near the playground. The police chased each thread with the futility of a dog snapping at fog. None of it landed. None of it brought Jason home. The Foreman family hung posters, clung to phone calls, and endured the cruel rhythm of false hope. A ring at the door, a rumor whispered by a neighbor, a tip from a stranger who swore they saw something. Each lead collapsed, leaving the family more hollow than before. And yet, 3 houses away, Michael Woodmansee was writing in his diary about control, about possession, about keeping Jason in a place where no one else could find him. The diary, which wouldn't surface for years, reads like an autopsy of obsession. Each entry dissecting his hunger to preserve, to contain, to own. It wasn't written for confession. It was written like a secret novel, crafted by a boy who believed himself a character in a world of his own making. The town didn't see it. Why would they? Michael wasn't questioned aggressively, wasn't put under suspicion. He didn't stand out. He never had. If the police glanced at him, they saw nothing but a pale, quiet teenager who couldn't possibly harm anyone. But something was off. It hung in the air like static, though no one could name it. People whispered about strangers, about phantom cars, about outside dangers. Nobody dared whisper about the boy who walked past them with his eyes fixed at pavement. And so the mystery deepened, not because the evidence was hidden in shadows, but because it was hiding in plain sight. What's worse than a crime unsolved? A crime you're looking straight at but cannot see. The South Kingstown police worked the case with the blunt tools of the 1970s. Shoe leather searches, door-to-door questioning, phone tip lines. There were no databases humming in the background, no cell phones pinging locations, no forensic breakthroughs waiting in the wings. It was human eyes and human guesses, stretched in over weeks that bled into months. Theories piled up like wreckage. Some investigators clung to the idea of a stranger abduction, the faceless bogeyman in a passing car. Others insisted Jason must have drowned, his small body hidden in a marsh or swept out to sea. Rumors drifted like smoke, a satanic cult, a pedophile ring, even whispers of Jason's family being cursed. The theories had one thing in common. All of them pointed away from home, away from the boy 3 houses down. And yet, small hints glimmered, though they were dismissed. Michael Woodmansee had been questioned once, lightly, politely. He was awkward, yes, but polite. No scratches, no suspicious alibis. He told police he'd been home that day, alone, writing or drawing. His story fit neatly into the box everyone already wanted to believe. The quiet kid couldn't possibly be involved. Still, the cracks were there. Woodmansee's journals, if they had been found then, would have detonated the case. They contained fantasies of keeping Jason, of preserving him, of crafting rituals of control. But those notebooks stayed hidden, tucked away in his bedroom like unexploded bombs. The investigation dragged. Posters of Jason grew weathered, sagging on telephone poles. Parents stopped allowing their kids to walk home from school. Theories that had once burned white-hot turned cold, abandoned. And all the while, Woodmansee walked among them. Not gloating, not careless, just blending, silent. His very invisibility became his shield. Police were chasing shadows when the truth was hiding in daylight. It's almost unbearable to read the official reports now, knowing what was missed. A closet never checked. A boy never pressed harder in questioning. Pages of confession that no one thought to look for. Theories abounded, but the truth was only a few feet away, scribbled in a diary, locked in a closet, waiting. For 8 years, Jason Foreman was officially missing. His name drifted into the kind of limbo where unsolved cases go to collect dust, mentioned in hushed tones but never answered. His parents lived in a cycle of torment, clinging to hope one day, drowning in despair the next. And then in 1982, the fragile facade cracked. 17-year-old Michael Woodmansee had grown into a man, if you could call him that, still living with his parents, still scribbling in journals. And then he slipped. He invited a boy into his house, a neighbor's son, harmless at first, an awkward invitation, the way a lonely man might beg for company. But the situation twisted into something darker. Michael tried to lure the boy upstairs into his bedroom, into his orbit. The child grew uneasy, fled, and told his father. That father didn't brush it off. He stormed into the Woodmansee home, fury boiling over. And in that confrontation, accusations, shouts, a demand for truth, Michael cracked. Words tumbled out, disjointed, chilling. He admitted something about Jason, something about 1975, something about what had been hidden all along. Police descended on the Woodmansee house, this time not with polite questions, but with shovels and warrants. They scoured the yard, the basement, the closets. What they found wasn't clean, wasn't simple, and wasn't the kind of discovery that ever leaves a community intact. Inside, they uncovered artifact of obsession, bones, fragments, items meticulously preserved. But worse, oh, far worse, were the notebooks. Hundreds of pages, filled with entries that blurred diary and confession, reality and delusion. In them, Michael described Jason's final moments. He described the aftermath. He described acts so grotesque that to this day, officials refuse to release them publicly, convinced the details are too corrosive for general consumption. That was the turning point. The illusion that Jason had vanished into the ether shattered. He had never left the neighborhood. He had been 3 houses away, kept in the secret kingdom of a boy who'd built his identity on control and possession. The breakdown wasn't just Michael's, it was the town's. Parents who had searched shoulder to shoulder with the Woodmansees now realized they'd been combing fields while the answer lay in the bedroom of the boy who sometimes helped with neighborhood chores. The skeleton in the closet was real, and it had been staring at them for years. When the truth clawed its way into daylight, the legal machine staggered forward. Michael Woodmansee was arrested, charged, and confronted with his own writings, those grotesque journals that blur confession and fantasy. His defense? That much of it was fiction, warped imagination, exaggeration. He insisted not every detail was literal. But how do you separate truth from fantasy when both are soaked in a child's disappearance? The court faced a terrible dilemma: force a trial that would air every sickening detail, or spare the Foreman family further agony by negotiating. In 1983, Woodmansee pled guilty to second-degree murder, a deal struck in shadows. Prosecutors admitted they wanted to avoid parading the journals before the public, to avoid shredding the Foreman's grief with even more horror. The sentence, 40 years. It sounded like justice in the moment, like a closing of the book. But even that number carried shadows. Rhode Island's prison system was lenient. With good behavior, Woodmansee could be free decades earlier. And so the questions began, questions that never really stopped gnawing. Did the plea deal protect the family, or did it protect Michael? What did the state hide in those journals? And was shielding the public worth sacrificing transparency? Could the legal system stomach its own failure? That a child had been missing in plain sight for 8 years while officials walked past the house again and again? For Jason's family, there was no resolution, only fragments. They received remains, enough for a funeral, but never the full truth. They were left with rumors, whispers of cannibalism, of rituals, of desecration. None of it confirmed, all of it plausible given the diary's passages. The state clamped down, sealing the ugliest parts away. The official line was simple: Jason had been murdered by the boy next door. The case was solved. But every parent in South Kingstown knew that wasn't the same as closure. What lingered wasn't just grief, it was betrayal. The betrayal of neighbors who never suspected. The betrayal of a system that had circled the wrong suspects. And the betrayal of a courtroom that traded full truth for a plea deal, leaving behind only speculation, shadows, and a gnawing question that never dies. What exactly did Michael Woodmansee do in that house? For a time, the case faded into the kind of uneasy silence that follows a storm. The Foremans were left with a headstone, not a son. The town tried to move on, to stitch up the wound and call it healing, but scar tissue doesn't erase the cut. It just hides it. Then came the real gut punch. In 2011, news broke that Michael Woodmansee was being released early, not after 40 years. Not even after 30. 28 years served, whittled down by good behavior. The man who had written diaries detailing one of the most grotesque obsessions in American criminal history was about to walk free. The Foreman family erupted. Jason's father, John, went on record, seething with the kind of rage that curdles into pure clarity. He said if the system couldn't deliver justice, he would. He openly vowed to kill Woodmansee if he ever saw him again. Imagine being a father, carrying the weight of your child's bones, hearing that the boy next door who stole them from you is being granted another chance at life. How do you not want blood? The public, too, rebelled. Protests erupted. Furious editorials filled newspapers. Talk shows raged. Rhode Island's lenient sentencing structure was suddenly under microscope. Lawmakers were forced to explain how a man who admitted to one of the most disturbing murders in state history could be given the keys to freedom before finishing even 3 decades of a sentence. In a twist that felt more like damage control than mercy, Woodmansee quietly agreed to a form of civil commitment. Instead of walking free, he was placed in a psychiatric facility, out of sight, out of reach. The state spun it as a compromise, but the damage had already been done. The message was clear. The system had never been designed to handle someone like him, and that's the legacy. A case that should have been an open and shut example of justice instead became a blueprint of failure. Rhode Island tightened some sentencing laws. Advocates called for greater transparency, but none of it erased the lingering dread that Michael's release had dredged up, the reminder that monsters don't just vanish when a gavel slams. Sometimes they're given a second chance. For South Kingstown, the shadow never lifted. Every parent who'd once let their kids roam free carried the lesson carved into their bones. Trust is fragile, innocence is temporary, and evil can live 3 houses down without you ever knowing. It's easy to talk about monsters like they belong in fairy tales. Wolves in the woods, ghouls in graveyards, shadows that creep only in the places you'd never dare to wander. But the truth of Michael Woodmansee is worse, far worse. He wasn't a shadow on the outskirts. He was wallpaper. He was background noise. He was the kid down the street, the man at the grocery store, the face you don't even register when you pass on the sidewalk. And that's what makes a skeleton in the closet such a perfect metaphor, because it wasn't just Jason's. It was ours. It was the community's. It was the justice system's. Everyone tucked something away, hoping the door would stay shut. Neighbors ignored the boy who didn't fit. Police overlooked the house that should have been scoured. Courts hid the details too disturbing to print. The system filed the truth into the dark and prayed it wouldn't crawl out. But closets don't keep secrets forever. They groan. They rattle. Eventually, the door creaks open, and what spills out isn't just bones, it's complicity. When you read the scraps of Woodmansee's diaries, you don't just shudder at his words. You shudder at the fact that he had the space to write them undisturbed for years. You realize that silence and politeness and willful blindness are the oxygen that monsters breathe. So here's the final, ugly reflection. The real danger isn't the boy who writes about skeletons. It's the world that doesn't read his words until it's too late. The scariest thing isn't the closet. It's the house around it, the community that walks by, the institutions that hesitate, the polite society that decides not to open the door. Michael Woodmansee wasn't the only one with a skeleton in his closet. He just happened to lock his tighter. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.